Hey guys, welcome back to the Casual NBA Fanatic podcast. To now, we're over 2 weeks into the season. I just wanted to hint off some of the major star trades that I believe have real chances of eventuating just in the coming months or maybe towards the end of the season. The market is always changing, and obviously we saw the rumors around guys like Giannis and LeBron during the offseason, and obviously those rumors tended to have settled down over the past few months, but with always new off-court dramas, the league always has new stars who seemingly enter these trade rumors, and for today's episode, I'm just hitting off 5 of those guys who could realistically find themselves in new homes at some point within the next year. And that starts us off with number 1, and the guy who the entire social media has been talking about over the past week, and that is Ja Morant. Now, with Ja Morant, I don't actually think Memphis will trade him. I mean, Ja Morant seems pretty attached to the city and the franchise overall, and there seems to be a massive, strong commitment going both ways. Ultimately, though, for me, between the coaching staff over the years and Ja himself, I don't think they match each other whatsoever. I think there's clear differing basketball ideologies between what the Grizzlies want to do, running that holistic drive, kick, relocate style that utilizes floor space to a really effective level. But I think Ja has always been someone, though, more so lenient on that heavy heliocentric style, mid-floor pick and roll spamming in the half court. And I just think, simply put, I don't think Ja has improved enough as a basketball player to satisfy that play style. And that's why Memphis has transitioned elsewhere over the past few years. And overall, with his regression, I mean, Ja's attacking the rim less. His shot touch has gotten worse and worse over the years. And now he's opened up pretty terrible from a shot-making standpoint. He was shooting 14% from 3, averaging 24 and 7, and initiating still 8 possessions of pick and roll each game on very, very average efficiency marks. And so I just think the Grizzlies, despite wanting this to probably work, I just think they'll have to come to terms prioritizing their next phase of basketball around finding the next star or the next set of high-level role guys who can uphold this unselfish brand of basketball that they do want to commit to and what the league is ultimately shifting towards. And therefore, though I don't think a Ja Morant trade market is all that deep at the moment, I just think it will probably be best for both parties just to part ways in general, just see what assets you can get back in this market. He is still a guy who does have, all in all, a superstar tier ceiling. He's still super young. And I think teams that I'd be looking at as just a general fit for Morant, and you guys have probably seen this throughout social media, but I think it would be one of the teams would be Minnesota. I just think adding another overpowered athlete next to what is a relatively polished perimeter roster, I just think that would help out a ton. Like we've seen the growth between Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards as shooters. You still got Naz Reid and Julius Randle, guys like Rob Dillingham as well. So I just think in terms of the spacing part of things, I don't think that's too big of an issue. The Heat, I think, would be a dream partner for Memphis. I just think if you could send Ja to an all-time basketball culture, a team who's also looking for another star talent to push their ceiling. And I just think the Grizzlies as well, from their part, they get out of it a decent selection out of the pool of high IQ, unselfish role players of that passing wing archetype. And that's that archetype that we know the Grizzlies absolutely adore. Brandon Clark, Santi Aldama, and so on. And, I'm not so sure about how much the Heat would love to, entertain these conversations, bringing in Ja Morant. And to be honest, the Heat's brand of basketball also looks relatively similar in that holistic integrated system like what Memphis have done. And for me as well, coming from Miami's standpoint, I probably prefer Tyler Hero right now as an offensive engine rather than Ja, especially for the modern day NBA. And so I just don't really see that happening too much either. So this is where I just don't see much traction happening. I do think he'll be on the trade block. I just don't know if they'll be able to get a deal done anywhere as soon as this year. The Kings are another team that would be interesting. I mean, just story-wise, I mean, you paired Ja Morant with Russell Westbrook, and that will feed fans for the rest of the year on the California side of basketball. But on terms of the actual on-court note, the actual spacing quality around the roster with Sabonis's perimeter initiation gravity, you also, hopefully, if you can keep a guy like Zach LaVine, you have shooters like Zach LaVine, Malik Monk, Keon Ellis as well. And then for Sacramento as well, I mean, you try to get rid of just DeMar DeRozan in that deal. I do think Levine and Ellis would be the ultimate prize for Memphis, but if you can try hold on to those guys, the actual basketball fit doesn't look too bad. But overall, though, for Sacramento's perspective, like, it doesn't really make much sense. The only thing that you can hold your head up high on if you do want a trade to happen between these two parties is that Sacramento haven't really made much sense themselves in recent years. And I just think it would be a fun pairing to see. I mean, Ja Morant and Domantas Sabonis together with Zach LaVine as that movement shooter. I do doubt, though, a deal gets done this year. I just think Memphis simply won't get back what they'll expect. And in my opinion, I think Isalo and the Grizzlies organization, I think they genuinely want this to work, at least for this season, to see what they can do. But I think that ultimately relies on Ja Morant's ability to mature, which, to be honest with you, I think a change of scenery would be the only thing to really kickstart that, like, within the next 12 months. Now, moving on to my second trade star, like this guy, Lauri Markkanen. He's been the obvious trade candidate over the past 3 years, and the obvious trade candidate that teams look at as that ultimate ceiling-raising and overpowered play-finishing forward piece. Someone that could be the piece that lifts the team's offense to championship quality. I mean, Lauri Markkanen, he's everything that teams want. He's switchable, extremely powerful, highly mobile. He's like a 7-footer who can fuel off-ball offense. He can contort defensive coverages when he is especially knocking down that ridiculous over-the-top jump shot. And, I mean, to start the year, he's averaging 31 and 7 on 56% effective field goal percentage. And that can be easily harnessed in a more efficient role as well, with just the looks that he does tend to settle for. And that does make this the best time to actually trade Markkanen for the bag that Utah have wanted for years. He's averaging 30 and 7, like that. Just overall, like, if you can harness any sort of that juice, that is extremely valuable. And after drafting Ace Bailey especially, and, you know, the Jazz, they already have such a high-quality array of offensive youth in their front line. I mean, they've got guys like Kyle Filipowski, Taylor Hendricks, Bryce Sensabaugh, Walker Kessler. I know he's out for the rest of the season, I think season-ending surgery, but they've got a really nice young core that they can tap into. And I just think it makes sense for Utah to get their assets worth in their hunt for their next generational talent to lead their next era of basketball. And I just I don't think they've found that just yet. And I think they've got to prioritize that. And with the treasure chest of picks that you can probably get from a Lauri Markkanen trade, I just think you got to capitalize right now, or at least within the next month or two. And I think the teams that would be interested somewhat, I think that actual list is pretty extensive, but the actual teams that are interested to the level of to give up what the Jazz actually want, that list might be a little bit shorter. I think for me, the team that I would think would be the most intriguing if he was to go there, I think that would be San Antonio. I just think pairing Lauri Markkanen next to Victor Wembanyama just offers that intensively physical presence at that physically absorbing power forward position. And that really helps Wembanyama absorb that contact against bigs, especially when you can let Wembanyama focus more on that pure backline protection role. And then obviously, I do think they're starting power forward, Jeremy Sohan. I think he is relatively stable. And I do think San Antonio have put heaps of resources into his development. But when you're thinking about the win now mindset that the Spurs probably should have, considering they do have a top 5 version of Victor Wembanyama, I think that makes this an effortless ceiling raising move. And that would really push them to the upper echelon of that tight Western Conference, especially with how well they've already started this year. I just think bringing Lauri, that would alleviate so much of their spacing concerns. And that just offers them another physical-based perimeter creator on the roster, and someone that offers that physical support in general, especially when Kornet isn't on the floor, in a way that aligns with the double big ideology that many teams are slowly shifting towards, especially when you get that supreme perimeter skill set from Lauri. And we've seen games where Victor Wembanyama gets absolutely doubled and he's getting absolutely face guarded from the perimeter. He can't assert his same positioning. I just think having someone like that, so gravitational, one of the most gravitational pick and poppers that we have in the NBA as well today, and one of the most physical screeners, I just think that would alleviate so much for their offense. And that will allow them to be relatively matchup resilient in the scope of this year's end of the regular season and heading into a playoff series. The only thing is, I just don't think the deal is overly necessary for San Antonio's part. They already have a second established star in De'Aaron Fox, who San Antonio look more than happy to keep. But the fit would make this team an offensive nightmare just pairing those two in the front line with Victor. I just think other teams as well, though, that would be obviously interested. Detroit, I mean, their spacing concerns surrounding the Cade Cunningham heliocentric offense, that would help out a ton. And then on the more unlikely spectrum, I know the Warriors have always been shifted into talks with Lauri, but that deal would center around literally giving up the rest of your young core. And it would center around Jonathan Kuminga as the main trade piece. Then you have to give up Pods and Moody, and I just think that becomes way too much. And then you're losing a lot of that credible depth that the Warriors hold their heads high on. And I just think that move would be next to impossible to occur. But obviously, fun to think about. You know, a Steph, Jimmy, Larry, Draymond, Horford unit would be absolute basketball heaven for us as fans. But again, this is one of the most unlikely outcomes that you could have thought of in this situation. But all in all, I think Lauri will get traded fairly soon. I just think it seems inevitable. I mean, he's 28 years old now, and he's looking on track to have his most aggressive season. So it'd be an absolute waste of his talent and the talent that they already have on the roster, sitting on the bench of most of these games. It'd just be a waste to see him put together more or less these meaningless stats for Utah. And I think they've got to really capitalize on this season before at least he hits 30 years old. They do have to get rid of him. Now, moving on to my third star, I have De'Aaron Fox listed. Now, I've been vocal about wanting the Spurs to lean directly into the talent of, you know, Dylan Harper and Steph Castle as that future backcourt pairing next to Victor, especially with how fast-paced their growth curves already expect to be. But obviously, having De'Aaron Fox, if you want to prioritize their growth, it does relatively clog up their usage rates, especially for Dylan Harper. And so seeing what value you could possibly get back for De'Aaron Fox right now, especially if he comes into the season looking like that, you know, Sacramento Kings version of that all-star level shot hunter that he was last year, and that really high efficiency pick and roll ball handling, that dynamic multi-scoring Arsenal guard. I just think if he comes in looking in that sort of shape, you really got to make a massive decision. Do you go all in with De'Aaron Fox right now? Or do you go for that all-in ceiling-raising move for right now, but also something that will probably reap more benefits in the future? That is a decision that they'll want to make. It is a gamble. You gave up 3 first-round picks to bring in De'Aaron Fox, but ultimately for me, I think you got to take the gamble for the highest possible ceiling for the future of this team. Now, the second question, though, obviously, isn't just should he trade him, but it's also where would they trade him to? And the team that I actually think makes good sense here, and the team that I think will actually harness De'Aaron Fox's athletic traits on the defensive end the best, I think that would be the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think they're still aiming to be this perennial contending force. And again, likelihood is low, especially with the value that the Wolves have gotten out of Julius Randle over the past year and the past year and a half now. And I think the nice balance that he gives them between that backcourt and the frontcourt, like he would obviously be the big trade piece within that deal. But having that skill guard for the future next to Anthony Edwards with the already established frontline that they have between Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert, I think that makes this move something that could, in theory, propel the Wolves more as a contender with the matchup resilience that Fox historically offers. And that's something that obviously Julius Randle is notorious for losing, especially with the health and intensity concerns that did pop up multiple times in New York. And obviously last year we saw him crash and burn in that Thunder series. I just think De'Aaron Fox brings more of that motor and I think Julius Randle's relatively matchup resilient. He's powerful, he's strong, creates great momentum with his body as well. He has a different array of counters that he can go to. I just think De'Aaron Fox with the speed in that backcourt leading to what the NBA wants to do with more of this pace pushing type of offense, that would suit a little bit more sustainably for Minnesota in their future. Another team though that I reckon San Antonio could look for a deal with, this is more just like an interesting thing. I just think the Lakers could be pretty suitable here. And obviously that deal would only have any realistic chance of happening if Austin Reeves' production comes down to earth. Now, San Antonio, they would have enough physical athleticism to cover Austin Reeves defensively, considering he would be the big piece in that deal. And I just think Austin Reeves would give San Antonio another pace-controlling half-court surgeon, someone that projects to fuel shot making much further than De'Aaron Fox off the ball as well. And obviously the Lakers, looking towards a Luka and De'Aaron Fox pairing for the future. I mean, that would be absolutely dynamic. And I think that there's less redundancies between that backcourt. You also might get a bit more of that defensive floor push as well. Overall though, Fox trade market at the moment looks pretty dry because we just don't know what type of level or what type of basketball shape he's going to be in when he does return from injury. And the Spurs did give up 3 first-round picks for him last year. and they probably won't be able to get anything similar back in that draft capital department. And therefore, this looks more like a deal that would probably take place in 2 to 3 years post Fox's prime. But it is definitely something to think about if San Antonio want to go all in on this future right now. Now, fourth guy I'm going to hit off today is Devin Booker. Now, this, like more like the Fox deal, is just more of like a fun exercise. But no one can deny the rumors are fairly valid here for Devin Booker to get traded. The only thing standing in the way is obviously Devin Booker's strong commitment and ties to Phoenix and the franchise. But with Phoenix like looking more or less in that really weak mold and a team that's unable to compete or rebuild properly for quite some time, I just think trading Booker right now just seems like the best thing for both parties, especially as Phoenix also just need to recover any assets from their roster construction hellhole that they've been stuck in that has absolutely ripped away all of their assets. And obviously for Booker, you're an elite like competitor in this league. You have one of the most coveted skill sets going around and someone who is playing some of the best basketball that he's ever played. I just think a trade would suit in every perspective here from both angles. The Wolves, I'll say it again, I think they would be intrigued by this deal, just pairing a skill guard next to Anthony Edwards. The only thing is, I just think the assets just aren't there for Minnesota to get this deal done to the level of assets that the Suns would want for someone of Booker's caliber. Miami, another team. Now, like they've really kind of just established this deep list of high-level role players, and I think that matched with possibly Tyler Herro as a centerpiece, that could be enough to get a deal going. But obviously Booker's a little bit older than Tyler Herro right now, and Tyler had an exceptional season as that designated 1A just last year. So I don't really see the urgency there for them to get that deal done. The Knicks, I think the Knicks would be a team that would have to be ultra aggressive if they wanted to get a deal done. And a deal for Devin Booker, I mean, that would ultimately center around probably Karl Anthony Towns and possibly even Mikal Bridges. And that seems pretty unlikely as well. Like you're giving up a lot. And obviously, like Karl Anthony Towns isn't the most coveted asset that the Phoenix would want back, especially with the front court depth that they've been trying to build over the past few years. And obviously, I've heard OKC as well get floated around just with the extensive draft capital. And that does give them, if they were to bring in Booker, just a solidifying perimeter execution punch. And in terms of just the actual perimeter firepower that OKC is relying on, they're kind of more or less gambling on J-Dub and Chet Holmgren to improve that perimeter skill set and the perimeter stability come playoff time. Bringing in Booker would absolutely mitigate all of those question marks. But either way, OKC aren't dealing away any of that precious depth to make the contracts work. And the last team I'm going to quickly sign off here, and these are all teams that really have legit no chance of a deal getting done with. But Orlando, I mean, if they decided to pick a direction with their 2 star forwards, I just think if they did bring in Devin Booker, that would immensely suit this team up to win playoff basketball games with just a finally solidified offensive core behind what is already a terrifyingly huge team. But for Devin Booker, I just think that specific partner hasn't quite opened up just yet with just how staggering of a market you would expect from a guy who is, for most people, I mean, he's still considered a perennial superstar in this league. And so I don't think a deal will get done this season, but when his contract, I think he's eligible to get traded like a month before the deadline from this season, even though he did sign that contract extension. I just think a deal should get done in the next year for Phoenix's part as well. Now moving on to our 5th guy, it's Nikola Vucevic I've got here. Now Nikola is obviously more of that lower end star caliber guy, if you even would still call him a star. But you'd probably specifically label him an offensive star if you want to give it that. But Vucevic at age 35 can still give a team that pure ceiling raising push with just how polished of a gravitational big man that he still is. He's shooting just under 50% from 3 to start the year in Chicago. And he's absolutely fueling with Josh Giddey this high-powered table set offense where Giddey's just absolutely spoon-feeding these athletes, and then Vucevic is just offering that absolutely instrumental space on the floor out of 2-man and 3-man actions too. But when obviously the Bulls come back to earth, I think when we are considering that this Bulls run is probably more of a signal that they are a 6 to 8 seed, and I don't think this run really signals that they're a 1 to 3 seed in the East. I just think considering that, Vucevic's talent could be seen as more delivering powerful results for higher floor teams that need that huge boost in general play finishing. Now, for Detroit, if a Lauri Markkanen deal just doesn't go through in the next few months, I think they would be generally fine slotting Vucevic into a pretty decent 25-minute night slot. I think that would just offer Cade just so much more space with Nikola's pick and pop gravity. Obviously, the frontline defense would be a major question mark, pairing him next to Jalen Duren for majority minutes, but the offense would just be much better overall. That Duncan Robinson DHO action with Vucevic would be great, just with Robinson's abilities as an external decision maker who can identify those basic reads against help. And just overall, Vucevic, he would be a fairly cheap like add-on, especially if the Bulls ever do cool down from this hot run. And it's no question that adding in a young, exuberant, highly capable rim protector, either from a trade or future development for Chicago, would be so much better for them long term, especially with that giddy Kobe White starting backcourt when Kobe White does return. And I just think a Detroit deal would make a lot of sense on a cheap deal. But pivoting towards a different direction that the Bulls and Nikola Vucevic could go to, I think just a short-term Boston landing could be pretty interesting. Though I just think Vucevic's like ascending value at this point probably makes this a little bit more unlikely. The Warriors have always been hinted as well, but with obviously Vucevic earning more and more respect with the offensive surge that the Bulls have been on, unless he gets bought out at some point, the Bulls probably would need to be pretty flexible with the offers, specifically from those contending teams like Boston and Golden State, which are the only franchises, to be honest, that would probably even entertain a Vucevic deal. So it would be a cheap deal, or it would be a buyout option with Vucevic. I think the Bulls should try shift away from him and actually just send him off to a winning spot for one last hurrah for someone that used to be a multiple-time All-Star. So to recap, my 5 names that I think should be on trade watch right now from this star echelon group, I have Ja Morant, Lauri Markkanen, De'Aaron Fox, Devin Booker, and Nikola Vucevic. Each of these guys are on the trade block probably for different reasons, in my opinion. You know, either timeline mismatches, organizational shifts, or just pure opportunity for these guys. But all of them could realistically headline the next big move before this season ends up being over. Obviously, discussions like these are more of like for fun and are more or less thought exercises. And I guess we'll just see if any of these long shot rumors do ever eventuate into anything. If you guys enjoyed the breakdown, follow the podcast and stay tuned for more weekly takes, storylines, and early season insights. I'll catch you guys later.